Hello? Hello, can you hear me? Please switch off your mobile phones, grab a seat, welcome. It's no exaggeration to say that over the last 30 years, millions upon millions of people have become addicted to the human drama of ordinary people under immense pressure. And sometimes the whole nation has been gripped by the snooker here at the Crucible Theatre, Sheffield. And while on Channel 4, often less numbers of viewers were watching some obscure documentary. Before I introduce, I should say that we have a pretty illustrious lot of people in the audience. And over the last 30 years, you, the people in the audience, have come up with some of the most original and groundbreaking ideas for documentaries. And here on the panel, we have the people that turned those ideas down. And
several times.
And they're going to be held to account today. And by the way, I should say, what an incredibly diverse bunch they are of white, middle-aged male. But let me introduce you to them quickly. You probably know who they all are, but they're very distinguished. And I'm fans and friends of all of them, really. But so we've got John Willis, who used to be head of Factual before becoming head of programs at Channel 4, and was head of documentaries in his capacity as head of Factual. Then we've got Peter Dale, who was head of documentaries, and then went on to be head of More 4 as well. Simon Dixon, who was deputy head of documentaries and behind amazing hit shows like The Boy's Skin Fell Off and all the rigs and lots of that sort of stuff. And then we also, Mark Raphael co-produced this panel, so only he knows exactly why he's on it. But him and Jasper put this panel together, and it's really kind of his thesis. They wanted actually Steve Hewlett instead of me, but they couldn't get Steve Hewlett, and so Jasper said, well, we should get someone that looks like Steve Hewlett, which is, neither me or Steve Hewlett were very pleased to hear that. In fact, I've got a photo of what Steve Hewlett looks like, so you don't take us, we look nothing like each other.
You're better looking.
Well, there is a similarity, but I found it offensive, and so does Steve. Anyway, Mark, maybe you could outline your thesis of 30 years of documentaries in an hour. Go.
Yeah, well, I've done a little tape. I mean, when Sheffield comes around, you get asked to do sessions, and 30 years of documentary seemed like a sensible one to do. So I've cut together a quick high point, low points, or various documentaries over the last 30 years, sort of skewed it around the panel. And I think it's useful as a starting point for the session. You saw it and thought it was a bit biased, but anyway, I'll let the audience be the judge of that. So roll the first clip.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be able to say to you, welcome to Channel 4.
Living in Belfast was a political education in itself. My own family have a Republican background, but living on the Falls Road, I saw internment, I saw the British soldiers, and that in itself was, I just got a political education from looking around me, and I was also charged with membership of the Irish Republican Army, of which I got 14 years imprisonment and served 10.5 years altogether.
Excuse me, Mr. Demarge.
Yes.
I'm sorry about the, mix-up last
But
night.
listen, my good friend, this is the last time that when out of your people, I don't mind whether it's a woman or not, be cheeky with me. You understand? This is my country, this is my place, this is my day. And last night I said I don't want your people anymore here. This morning you have to speak to me, and the first thing you do is to take photos from me, before you even ask me if you are welcome or not.
Should be sent off as well. Is he going to send him off? He's got to send him off. What sort of thing is happening here?
We asked her name and were told Mei Ming. This means no name. It was the second time in her short life that she'd been abandoned.
completely the wrong road, and she's getting dragged down by Stuart, her boyfriend. She's been brainwashed. That's as simple as it is. She's been brainwashed. She even thinks differently now to what she did 4 months ago. It's such a change, it's just unreal. She's gone off the edge.
You say to me the food I eat is not healthy in a box.
Crap.
Yeah, that is crap. But the point is, if my food crap, your weed is crap.
Prove it.
Well, yeah.
I can prove your food's crap.
How?
Look at you.
But I'm happy.
Right? Your food's crap. Look at you.
What's wrong with me?
Okay, if I have to tell you, it's not worth it.
Hwang Chun-sai has spent his adult life in hiding. Now he's about to take a journey he hopes will change him forever. This is the story of China's Elephant Man.
Welcome, everybody. My name's Johnny Kennedy. I'm 36. There's my mother. And next to her is my brother. And that's me in the box.
Nothing remarkable about this family at all, except for one thing.
Stop it. Come on, Tom.
They were asked if they'd be filmed around the clock for 100 days and nights to give an unprecedented documentary portrait of family life.
I'd say there might be one building. Yeah, I think one's building.
I am going to be the brick wall. What you want to do is on the other side of the brick wall, and I'm afraid to say I am the brick wall, and you are not going past. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll explain it to you.
No, because he didn't say I had a break detention.
Stop.
No, because he didn't say I had a break detention, so why should I do detention when I shouldn't even have one?
Stop.
No, because I'm right.
Stop.
Oh my God.
Stop. Thank you.
So, 30 years of documentaries in 4 minutes, with a minute on educating Essex. And was there a golden age, and if so, where did it all go wrong? Let's find out. So, John, let's start with you. What was it like when you joined Channel 4? What was the pattern or strategy for documentaries? Was there one? What were you up to in those days?
When I arrived a couple of years after the channel had started, it had been like a dam, and behind the dam were a fantastic number of filmmakers from all over the place who felt shut out from the BBC for lots of different reasons, or from ITV. And suddenly Channel 4 was there, and there was an amazing flood of ideas and projects. Some of them were fantastic, like good, bad, and probably indifferent. And it was really impossible to work out, if you were a viewer, whether the film's being made for the viewers or just being made for the person's mates quite often. And it was really hard to understand where they were in the schedule, what was the importance of documentaries.
But was there something good about that chaos and amateurism?
Of course, because there's some fantastic pieces of work come out of that you never probably would have ever commissioned, but somehow in a system in which thousands of flowers bloom, there are going to be some great things. But it seemed to us like the right thing to do. Peter Moore joined as head of documentaries, or commissioner editor for documentaries, and we started to organise things into strands where we still hoped that all the filmmakers, from junior filmmakers to the sort of Nick Broomfields, would all come and find a home at Channel 4.
So you created cutting edge and true stories?
We created cutting edge and true stories,
We're still going. So tell us the thinking about them and what they were supposed to be when you started them.
Well, cutting edge, it was different political times. We were living then in Thatcher's Britain. Well, we're still living in Thatcher's Britain, of course, but we're living in Thatcher's Britain then.
But Michael Foot was the big hope in those days.
Exactly, and there was a sense that there were a lot of voices that were not being heard on mainstream television. There was a story of Britain that wasn't being told. So we made the real decision with Cutting Edge to make films about Britain and try to create a portrait of Britain as it is now, to hear different voices, see different places, tell different stories.
And true stories?
True stories. We wanted to continue. Channel 4 didn't have much money in those days. Our programme budget was quite small. We wanted to be a place where great filmmakers, whether it was Errol Morris or Fred Wiseman or Ross McElwee from the US or great filmmakers in the UK, we're never going to make something within the confines of a strand like Cutting Edge, still felt they had a place on Channel 4 to make feature-length documentaries, and that I think proved out to be quite sensible.
Yeah, and we've got a clip from one of your favourite programmes from your era. Do you want to introduce it, or should we just show it? The clip, which clip is it? Clip 2? Homeland, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you say favourite, if I had to think about films that I was really proud of, it was, and in a way it shows you how things have changed, but we supported a fantastic Latvian filmmaker who made films in a huge sort of Russian cinematic style called Yuris Podnieks, and he charted the collapse of the Russian Empire through the eyes of small country Latvia. And then he went on to make some more films that were shown at peak time, and one morning I got a phone call saying that while filming for Channel 4, 2 of his cameramen had been shot by the Russian secret police. Wow. And you realise that you're sitting in an office in Charlotte Street, commissioning people and organising the world, but people take risks to bring back the truth for the viewers. And so, this is an experience and a film that I'll never forget.
It's amazing. Maybe we should see a bit of it. Can we show clip 2, Homeland, please?
Būs daudz, vajag tik saukt.
Kur ir?
Arī pagaid. Trāpīju.
It's unbelievably powerful.
As it happened, I'd been over to Latvia 2 or 3 times to see edits and things like that. So I'd got to know Andris, who's the guy who dies there, and the second cameraman died, Frida died a little bit later on. And it is amazing that he's so desperate to keep filming that even as he's dying, he's saying, film me, film me.
It's unbelievably powerful. I mean, there's a worry, I suppose, that in the modern era, films, even of that quality and power and passion, find it harder to find a place. Why were you able to, or did you just think, do you think these guys could commission stuff like that, did commission stuff like that? Don't mean to attack them, but what I mean is, were you not worried about viewing figures in the way that people are today, or?
We made trade-offs all the time. So, we would do Graham Taylor, the England football manager, which gets a huge audience. And we would also make a film about, we had the latitude to make a film about Russian politics, which would get probably in those days, it was probably getting 1.5 million, which was still pretty good. And that was the trade-off we made. And I suspect Channel 4 has always made that trade-off from day one to now, where you balance popularity with something that's a bit more risky. We were lucky that we were able to take more risks. We had less money, but we could take more risks in those days. There were less channels, less competition, and there was probably less pressure.
Yeah. Well, it does seem to me that in some senses it was a bit of a golden age of the thing, but every era has some really interesting bits of it. So maybe we should move on. I'd love to hear your views on some of the other things that came next.
Yeah, all bad.
All bad.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Now, for me, so one of the reasons I actually joined Channel 4 is because I wanted to understand the mind of Peter Dale, the Silver Fox, and understand what was going on inside his head. And I was none the wiser, and I still don't know. So it's a nice opportunity for me to try and work it out, because I suppose I kind of see you, Peter, as like, coming from a very similar sort of place of incredibly serious, profound documentaries. And yet also you're the person that was kind of wife swap, faking it, and the format king. What were you up to? And how did you take on what John had kind of left behind? What were you doing when you were head of documentaries? I have no idea.
No, I've got no idea either. I think quite a lot of this happens to you, actually.
I think that's one of the secrets of commissioning that I learned, which is that you sort of open the doors and see what blows in a bit, and you pick from those things according to your taste and what you think the audience is interested in. So the formats, I think, came out of, well, I joined in 98, and that was 1898, and Tony Blair had just arrived, and there was a sort of feeling that in Channel 4 that Channel 4 had done very well out of Thatcher and an unwelcome government and some major cultural shifts that had disenfranchised quite a large part of the population. And Tony Blair's sort of all-inclusive thing was washing around the building in a way, I think. There was a sense that actually we should be making television that isn't, on the one hand, serious and profound and low audience, and on the other hand, high ratings and entertaining, that you should try and bring those two things together. And that intelligent, interesting, difficult work can be popular if you frame it correctly. And I think at the same time there was a sense, not just John's inheritance, but for the 2 or 3 years while I was there was a sense that there was an awful lot of kind of middling stuff. You know, it was quite well made, it was quite an interesting story, it was quite entertaining, and it was a little bit kind of vanilla. And what we wanted to try and do was to sharpen it up a bit, I think. We kept on saying, how can we clear out that middle ground of stuff that's quite interesting and quite good, and throw our energies into things that feel really different and difficult to commission, and take a few risks. And one of the things was with documentary that, and someone said this to me right at the time we were trying to think about this, and also just the other week actually, you know, you spend a long time in a documentary waiting for the good bit, that everything is building towards the good bit. And why don't we try and build the good bits in a bit more frequently? And you can spend months and months on location waiting for something to happen, and in celebrated cases it happens, but in lots of cases it doesn't happen. How can you compress that process so that you bring together the elements of the story you want to tell in a short amount of time?
Doesn't that restrict the room for manoeuvre for filmmakers? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, making episode 6 of series 3 of a returnable format, even though it guarantees for the audience action because the wife swap will cause a furore, doesn't that also maybe restrict the room for manoeuvre of great filmmakers to express themselves?
Yeah, and I don't think great filmmakers were naturally drawn to it. But I think people who, you see, I suppose what we're doing instead of watching what was going on, we were trying to make it happen. And what you'd do is you'd set the situation and you'd wind it up and then you let it go and film it. And very often filmmakers were coming back before we did that sort of thing and saying, you know, I've spent 6 months. In fact, I had a letter from a filmmaker who'd been commissioned by Peter Moore, and he was still making it when I arrived. It took him 4 years to make the film, and I used to get letters from him. He was sitting in a police station in Calabria trying to film a mafia investigator, and he said, I've been here for 2 years and nothing's happened yet. And he was quite happy to do it for £30,000, and I said, well, just stay there as long as you like, and I'll keep writing to you. And he was, you know, in the end, nothing really happened. So I think we were thinking, you know, how can you compress the money? How can you make the money work harder?
What do you make of that, John? Do you buy that? How did you feel watching that happen?
I didn't have a problem with the fundamental reasoning behind it, because I could, you know, I thought Faking It was a, you know, great innovation. It was actually a powerful series. You learnt a lot about different things, and I could see how that could work. I suppose what worried me was that Channel 4 become too formulaic, too repetitive, too, you know, actually it may be that was the time that was more vanilla, in my view, than probably the kind of Thousand Flowers mixed up, some crap, some great, and some in the middle era. But it was a perfectly, you know, proper thing to do, and it was mixed up with some fantastic pieces of individual documentary making, was Peter's that sort of person.
You didn't have a returnable series though, John, did you? When you were there, you wouldn't recommission. You think once you've done a series, you're done, right? That was...
Yeah, I think that you know, we were under less pressure, but I think one of the things that I suppose one of the things I think about Channel 4 now is that if you've got something like, say, Coppers, which is terrific, first series fantastic, second series not quite so good. I met someone the other day who said, oh, they're thinking of doing a third series, and my heart sank because I thought, actually, that's not what Channel 4's like. You should do one series, two series, if they're great, move on. But move on from there, go out at the top. And I think there is pressure on Channel 4, or maybe a temptation, to over-farm some of the great ideas or great series.
Well, can I just... I wasn't commenting on your particular programme as being vanilla. What happens, I think, to the end of every cycle, and you can see the cycles quite clearly, is that people get into a rut, and they start to regenerate the same things over and over again, and it takes a kind of moment where you break out of that, like the beginning of Cutting Edge and True Stories, and like The Rigs, where you suddenly see the world and filmmaking in a different way. And I remember being at the BBC when Cutting Edge started, and I was in a corridor, we were making 40 minutes, and it gave us a real shock. It really wound the odds up quite significantly.
Well, the good thing about Channel 4 is that there are different eras. There hasn't been one person running documentaries for 25 years, that there's almost a deliberate policy that every 5 or 6 years there's a handing of the baton on, and you've got to understand you hand on to the next person, it's still Channel 4, but they'll interpret Channel 4 in a different way.
I was hoping an argument was going to break out, but you seem to be agreeing. I mean, also, kind of basically, it seems that Peter, we should kind of stereotype you as just being formats, because you also did some amazing things, like everything from the government inspector and Jamie's school dinners, loads of seminal kind of bits of television. And one of the clips we've got of yours, maybe do you want to introduce it, or should we just...
What is it?
Feltham Sings.
Feltham Sings, yeah.
Let's show clip 3, please.
Well, is Roger Grafe here? Good. So Roger came in the office, and it was always a pleasure to see Roger, and he'd always have some mysterious bit of access for you, and it would be very difficult to schedule, and it would be generally quite difficult to commission. And he came in one day and he said, I've got an amazing bit of access for you. I've got access to Young Offenders Institute. And we were at a time now when Wife Swap was doing 5 million and Faking It was, still going, and we were looking at Super Nanny, and so we were on a roll. And I thought, I don't really want a 5-part series inside Feltham, because it'd be quite grim and quite difficult, and it was classic what those audience things do to your mind, which is, actually, do we really need this? No, we probably don't. And so I said to Roger, I was thinking, how am I going to say no to Roger? And Roger was talking about Young Offenders and Feltham and stuff, and I said, Roger, do you know what? I think this is a really, really great idea, but I think you should do it as a musical, thinking that he'd say, oh, God, for fuck's sake, and walk out. But he said, oh, that's an interesting idea. Who could do that? And I said, oh, well, I think Brian Hill's free, knowing that he wasn't. I was just really trying to stop this happening. And I came back from holiday, and it had been commissioned.
Let's see a clip of it. That's clip 3.
I'm getting shipped off the wing because they think that I'm at risk of committing suicide. My dad recently has had a couple of heart attacks. My aunt's only got 6 months to live. I told this to a nurse from the outreach team, and he's put me on a section 2052, which is a self-harm assessment risk.
I can bend the card with my biscuit. It takes about 11 minutes to swing. You can't choose family, but you can choose visitors. I watch manhandle, watch my babysitters. Prison is a disease called boredom. I take pictures of the cars I've stolen. One man cheated, another man's road. You can lose your footing online and so. You can't overdose on 2 paracetamol. They work me at night from the night watchman.
He can't overdose on 2 paracetamol. We watch him at night, he's a night watchman. He can't overdose on 2 paracetamol. We watch him at night, he's a night watchman.
That's bizarre. Before we go on to Simon Dixon and Mark, I thought I'd just quickly, because not everyone will know the history of Channel 4, and I just thought it'd be quite useful just to kind of almost just walk you through very quickly the kind of eras of the destiny, or whatever you call it. That's me. Sorry, it's not me. So first it was John Willis, as we know. Oh no, that's not John. Sorry, that's Jasper. That's not John. Come on. So then it was Peter Dale. And after Peter, it was Angus, wasn't it? It was Angus McQueen. And then after Angus, it was Hamish. And then Dixon was really, you did a lot of your best stuff with Hamish, didn't you? So it was Simon Dixon here. Basically, I wanted to talk to you about kind of what you were up to. I mean, according to Mark's kind of opening showreel, there's a kind of sense in which you're fighting with Big Brother a bit, and that maybe you kind of feel that docs have to compete with Big Brother by doing things like The Elephant Man and The Boy Whose Skin Fell Off. Did you see it like that at the time? Is there any truth in that?
Well, no, actually. I'm not trying to fight with Big Brother. I mean, the interesting thing, I feel like a bit of an imposter sat here, because listening to these two gentlemen talking about their strategy and the vision they had and relating it to what's going on in the wider world of politics and Tony Blair and national life, I was never really like that at 4. I was driven by, I guess, a more kind of base combination of insecurity and self-interest and ambition. And my ambition in my early years at Channel 4 was to have Peter Dale, who was obviously there and overlapping with me, come over to me and say, that was good. You know, that was my real... It didn't happen very often. but for the first 2 years at Channel 4, where I genuinely did not know which way was up. I was so sort of confused and baffled about how to commission. Peter didn't come into my office very often and say very much. But then
I was equally baffled.
I think you probably were. But then I was fortunate enough to do this Boy Whose Skin Fell Off film. And
why is it called that, by the way? He's not a boy. He was like 36. Or whatever.
Are you being a pedant?
No, I just think there's kind of something about the attitude to sort of... It's a better title, The Boy Whose Skin Fell Off. But there's something slightly... kind of, it's a bit like kind of gypsy weddings. They're actually Irish travellers, not gypsies. There's a slight sense of kind of like, you know, you could say that there's a shift change by partly in that title. I don't mean to be pedantic.
Well, we were already into the kind of body shock era by then, and we were doing the boy who gave birth to his twin, and the girl who this, and the boy who that.
And the 27-inch man.
The 26.
And the girl with 8 limbs.
Yep.
And Born with 2 heads.
Yes.
And My Daughter the Mermaid.
Yes.
Is that a good one?
Yes, it was a good one actually.
And Twins Who Share a Brain.
The Twins Who Share a Brain.
You kind of ploughed this field for quite a while, didn't you?
Yes. Yes. But look, 15 years ago, The Boy Whose Skin Fell Off would have been called Johnny's Story, and it would have been, you know, it would have probably done well enough within the context of what well enough meant back then. But I had high hopes for it because I thought it was special, and I wanted a title that would provoke people into turning up to watch it. And the combination of skin falling off with the word boy, you know, it kind of shouldn't happen to a boy. You know, it can happen to an aging reptile, but it shouldn't really happen to a boy. And I know he wasn't a boy technically, but in a sense he was, because his life was cut short and his opportunities were limited, and the kind of future that we can all hopefully look forward to was going to be forever denied.
It struck me that a lot of your programs had amazing emotion about them. You know, maybe that's true of all documentaries, but sort of a lot of your stuff kind of tapped into, you know, the kind of the sort of make me normal stuff and all that kind of thing.
Sure, I was always much less political than some commissioners. And some indies would say, why don't you do stuff about, you know, China and Afghanistan? And the truth is, it's not that I'm not interested in those countries and what goes on within them, but there were people who were much better than me in the building who were already doing those things. So, for example, Mark Roberts, who's head of Factual at Dragonfly, is going to go and join John, brilliant EP at Dragonfly, is going to join John at Mentor. Mark did, at the same time I was doing The Boy Whose Skin Fell Off, he did the most extraordinary film, commissioned a great film from Brian Woods' company called China's Stolen Children, which was a brilliant piece of feature-length news and current affairs inspired documentary that I would never have done. So I kind of took the view that if there were other people in Channel 4 who were excelling in areas that I felt less creatively comfortable in, then let them excel in those areas, and I would try and plough my own furrow. And I guess the furrow that I ploughed most recently and most capably, thanks in full to the people, the indies that I was doing it with, notably Nick and Magnus at the Garden, or previously Firefly, now Dragonfly, was the rig thing. And it wasn't so much a reaction against, it wasn't sort of planning for what the next Big Brother should be. It stemmed from a kind of frustration that all the technological resource that Channel 4 was directing towards Big Brother was pointed towards these people whose lives I felt were not that interesting. I was one of the few people in Channel 4 who at times would voice a general lack of love for Big Brother. I didn't say it publicly very often, and I didn't slag the programme off, and I value what it did for Channel 4 and its history and its viewing figures and its reputation. But I didn't watch it very often. And after a while I thought, crikey, we're using all these cameras to capture what's going on in this house, and there must be somewhere more interesting in Britain that we can put these cameras than this one bloody Big Brother house. And I said that out loud after a beer over a plate of Vietnamese mackerel with two very, very capable producers, Nick Kerwin and Magnus Temple, who immediately, as all good indies do, said right back to me, that's a good idea, because there's nothing a commissioner likes better than to be told that he has had a good idea, because the idea is supposed to be you have the ideas and we just sit there and pick from them all. But in actual fact, commissioners do occasionally have them.
I tend to favour my ideas as well.
You have good ones, but
no,
if you
I'm just saying that, yeah.
But you've got to have the good idea in the room with somebody who's capable of grabbing hold of what is good about it, and then you work on it together.
So we've got a clip of the family, which is the first one, wasn't it? So should we have a look at that clip, and we'll talk a bit about it. Clip 4.
I'm not having this argument with you.
Get out.
I know you think that you're stronger than Tom, right?
Oh, look, and you're just trying to
I don't care. You've just pulled me, and I've hit my head on a bar because I'm trying to look up for you. Ugh. You idiot! Get out of my room! Tom! Get out of my room! Get out of my room! Get off. You don't get off me. Get off. You just shoved me on the floor into the radiator and onto all my stuff. Get off me now. Get off my PlayStation. Get off me now. Get off my way. Get out.
I suppose something we're going to... I mean, it's a brilliant series, and a lot of the rigs have completely revolutionised documentaries. But I suppose there's kind of worry, and we might say that it takes away the art of the filmmaker. So, rather than having committed filmmakers directing, building relationships, making documentaries, there's a handful of companies with these kind of massive Hoover-like operations that just put 100 cameras somewhere and hoover it all up. And in a way, the passion of filmmaking is being taken away from filmmakers that might be in this audience, and handed to just a couple of companies that get the monster rig. Does that bother you?
No, because I don't think that's a full reflection of what the impact of the rigs has been. I understand where you're coming from, and I have, when I was at 4, people would occasionally make that point, make that criticism. But what's happening with these shows is that they're actually bringing on a whole new generation of young people to work on documentaries, in the same way as what Peter did with the formats did. These are the people working on these shows at junior levels go on and they develop a confidence about themselves and their role within teams and their ability to lead creatively and edit and managerially, and they go on and they make good stuff. I've never really felt that putting more documentary on British television meant that we were going to be in some way harming the genre that I've spent my whole life aspiring to work in and succeed in. I think what we did is we pushed other genres out a little bit. I think what happened is we led to a blossoming. This led to, in all of these eras, a blossoming of documentary content. So across the piece, there was just more factual television on Channel 4, and it's not as though there's been a finite amount of hours that thes programmes could fill.
But do you see in the past that you might say, that's a Brian Hill film, or that's a Peter Dale film when he was a filmmaker or whatever. Now I say that's a rig show. That's a rig show. I see the rig. What do you guys think of it? First of all, John, what do you make of the rig?
I think the rig shows have been fantastic because you see a school or you see Britain just through different eyes, and in a way an individual filmmaker going into a comprehensive school in Essex or going into an A&E ward in South London would be really pushed to be as intimate, to get as many insights into the experience. And I think actually it's a really great way of telling the story of what happens in Britain. I think it's been terrific. And I don't think it, I actually agree with Simon, I don't think it shuts out lots, there's a lot of other films being made all over Channel 4, and this is there as well. It's just part of the different weaponry that a channel uses to deal with a particular, deal with real life.
Do you agree with that, Peter?
Yeah, I do. I think one of the symptoms of the rig is that it's about producers more than it's about directors, I think. And there's a very fine line between the two, but producing a rig show is the kind of zenith of contemporary factual at the moment. And if you do it well, it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. I think that's an enormous testament. Some of the directors who come off the rig shows, you know that they don't quite understand how you work on location in an intimate situation as well as they might do. They know how to cut and they know how to tell a story, but working a location is a different kind of thing. And if I had a concern about it, I think they're fantastic shows. If I had a concern about it, it's there's possibly a generation of people who don't quite know what the parameters are of how to conduct a location.
What makes a good rig show? How do you choose where to rig and what not to?
Well, secret spaces, I think, is critical. You shouldn't be rigging somewhere that somebody can go into and manipulate single camera fashion better or as well as a rig could do, if that makes sense. I mean, that clip's quite a good one, the one of the brother and sister in the family home, because I remember when I first watched that, I thought, that's great, because if I'd been in there filming with a camera, I would have wanted to stop them fighting, because I'd have been worried that they might bang their head. I would have, after 10 seconds, said, hey, cool down, thinking I'd got enough. I'd have wanted to ask them a question. I would have affected the environment. Now, I don't want to get all poncy, but filmmakers, good filmmakers, can and should affect the environment they're in. I wanted to do rig shows where the environment was not affected by the presence of the filmmaker in the room. And so Secret Spaces works. You know, I worked a lot with, as you say, Hamish Maikura, who was great, did massive amounts for supporting the rigs, as did Angus. And we went to see a baby being born in the multi-camera gallery for the first series of One Born Every Minute. And we were sat there with our lattes in what do you call them, an OB truck that the previous week had been recording the British Open golf tournament. And the cameras in this truck were focused on this young lady who was, as we supped our coffees, pushing a wee baby into the world. And Hamish and I looked at each other and we realised, as we watched, that we were both crying. Partly because it was so moving, and partly because we couldn't believe how lucky we were, because we knew we had a massive hit on our hands.
You were crying about the ratings.
We were crying. You know what? We were crying with relief that we had, honestly, that we had invested. I think we were moved by what we were seeing, but we were also crying with relief that what had been a kind of 3-year rolling program of investment in a type of program making that at the beginning everyone said would not work, we were seeing it come to fruition in the most magical way, in the most secret space of all, as Mrs. Jones brought little Buster into the world. And it really did feel that the Docs team at that point had reached a new place where successful storytelling was going to be the order of the day for a while, and so it proved.
I think it goes back to what Pete was saying about trying to move away the sort of middling stuff, because with 160 grand and a certain amount of time with a filmmaker, you know you're going to get a certain type of film. And I think the weird thing about the rig is that you're filming quite a short space of time, and for the amount of hours to the amount of time you're filming is a completely different ratio. And so it's quite high stakes. And I think when it works, it's obviously good, but you know, it's tricky to know how it's going because you're not quite sure what you've got, because you can't be across all the feeds and all the sound, and so you're not quite sure until you've sat in the edit really if it's gone that well. I mean, you know you've got key sequences, but it's a completely different
I mean, all of you are making a very good case for why your next innovation was brilliant and emotional and broke open a new era of filmmaking. But it strikes me there's a slight kind of commercialization going on here, that sort of rather than being a sort of just one-off passion documentaries, it becomes formats you can roll out again and again, or it becomes rigs where you can massively kind of have the next rig show or whatever it is. I mean, Mark, are you worried about the over-commercialization of the industry?
That was when I took some money off you playing pool, wasn't it?
Yeah. I had to take a photograph so you'd remember that I'd paid you. Yeah, but no, seriously though. I mean, you also
we thought that was an average Channel 4 budget. We didn't realise it.
But
no, I mean, in that sense, I think where we are now. I mean, last night, 24 Hours in A&E did 2.8 million. It's people still want that, enjoy that show, and that if it can work for 10 weeks or however many weeks it is, people enjoy that experience. And I think from our point of view, that gives us more time, a bit like Big Brother in that sense, to think where next, what new, where can we go that's new. It opens the opportunity creatively. If you have success, if you're struggling, you're constantly looking, but I think it gives you building blocks. And at the minute, I think it is successful, it is working. The films are well received, the audience love them.
If you say so yourself.
Well,
no, fair enough. No, I know what you're saying.
The feedback's great, and the ratings are strong, so it feels sensible to use, that success to...
How do you know how many of the audience will? It's such a big investment putting the rig in somewhere. How do you know that the audience is going to come back again and again and again and again for One Born Every Minute, 24 Hours in A&E, these shows? I mean, a bit of me sometimes feels like I've watched one of them, I kind of get the idea. I'm not sure I want to watch series 7 of it. How come people come back, do you think?
Because commissioners and TV audiences are very different kettles of fish. And as commissioners, you graze, you dip into things. How many times have you, as a commissioner, said to someone, yeah, I love that film, a great film, when in fact you've only managed to watch the first 10 minutes on catch-up? You become a professional grazer. Whereas if you're a loyal, dedicated viewer of television, factual television, you become a devotee. And in the same ways people are fixated upon getting through box sets of Dexter or The West Wing or Homeland or whatever, there are people out there who are ready to become devoted to factual television. And that's what Peter started. I mean, effectively the rigs, although in some ways they were a reaction against the dialed-up jeopardy of the format shows, they came from the same place, which was a determination to create returnable factual brands that would inspire loyalty, devotion in an audience, and that in turn would be, in our view, good for the channel that we were working for at the time.
It's a commercial, it's a commercial organisation, and it's getting harder it's harder than it was yesterday, today.
Did you feel when you were doing it, though, that those scenes that were faked, as it were, did that push you?
I'm sorry?
Well, there was the Daddy's Girl.
I thought I heard him say faked.
Yeah. Daddy's Girl, yeah, that was a fake.
Fine. And then there was another film, Rogue Males, which had sequences that were constructed.
Constructed,
Did that push you onto the format? Did you feel that the directors were wanting to do more with documentary?
Certainly. I mean, there's a complete difference between Daddy's Girl, which was, Ed and Adam were completely stitched up by the contributors, and everyone fell for it. And Rogue Male, which was Dominic really trying to have a go at making it feel visceral and fast and interesting and dangerous. And yeah, there was clearly an appetite at that time, which I think is not dissimilar to this appetite of how can we wind a situation up and then let it go? How can we contrive a situation that's going to bring out things that we could spend months waiting to film? Yeah, I think it's all part and parcel of the same need.
I mean, commercialisation isn't always a bad thing. What it's done is driven Channel 4 towards innovation. Exactly. Because you think, okay, we need to get an audience, and you come up with either rig shows or with format. So, it's not always bad. Sometimes it makes you, makes you think in a different, in a different way.
Always the difficult thing is when you let go of it, because it's like crack.
Yeah.
No, that's a difficult thing. Yeah, okay. But after Series 5 of Y-Swap, I was saying, do we really need Series 6? Do we really have to have Series 6? I think it went on to about 12, didn't it, in the end? It's so difficult to give that up. While it's still getting 8%, you still keep paying for it.
I wish I'd, especially as factual, I'm doing Inside Nature's Giants, and we've run out of big animals. Yeah. So it's quite simple. There's no more big animals to try.
You try Steve Hewlett.
Yeah, but it's true.
That's
Steve a kind of backhanded insult at me, though. I look like
Steve Hewlett, come on. Look, you think how many people will want to watch that?
Better for radio, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yes, so the new era now, Ralph Lee, head of factual, what's next? Nick Mursky over from the BBC, where's it going? You've fast-forwarded the film you made squeezed 30 years of Channel 4 into what looked like this show made by North One. And what's it? Where are we heading now, Mark?
Well, I think, as Peter said, I think our job is to sort of open the doors and see what comes in the sense that I think the thing that strikes you about documentaries is that they are at the heart of going forward. I think what tends to happen is creatively, they're always looking for the next what's going on in the world, either in form or in content. And I think right now, we're in a good place in the sense that we've got a lot of strong shows, a lot of returnable shows, a lot of opportunity to keep people
Do you think
coming
there'll
in.
be far more content that is the thing that is going to break open?
I think authenticity is what people are reacting to at the minute, and One Born feels like it's an authentic version of a bird, and people love the authenticity of that. Feels like a school, and people like that, and I think that's where the audiences are reacting strongly at the minute. And I think at the minute that's working, but obviously things will evolve and change. But at the minute we're doing very well with that type of feel of programme. You feel that's a Channel 4 documentary.
Tell us a bit about Educating Essex. This was one of your shows last year. Why did you commission it? And what was the thinking behind it? What were you trying to achieve with it?
I think there had been a series on the BBC about education and about the postcode lottery, which was okay, but it didn't feel like a school to me. And we were in that rig space, and I remember thinking, kids are never going to be like they are when some guy standing there with a camera. Maybe they might be if we stick cameras up there. I wasn't sure, but it was in an era where I think we commissioned it quite early. I think, and it sat on the shelf for a long time because we wanted to let the kids leave the school. But it felt as though it was a good way of getting to something that I found that was when I watched television, that was a space that I hadn't seen done well at all in documentary, and I thought it's a space that I react to. I watched Granny Show as a kid. It was something that I found funny, emotional. It took me back to...
I mean, most education programs in the past have been quite serious and heavy.
Yes.
And your memories of school were kind of more like, messing
Well,
around.
there's a bit in the pre-title where the kid jumps on another kid and he knocked him over, and I think that my memories of school are more like that, and more rough and tumble. Slightly, it wasn't... I think it's a very serious issue, but to do it in a way with those teachers that they could draw out the seriousness and the issues of the day. And kids are always... For me, and the other thing, the kids are always portrayed in like a brat campy way. They're always troubled teenagers. They're difficult. And I wasn't necessarily sure that was true. So it was nice to see them be themselves and see their relationships with adult and authority that was slightly more complicated, should we say, than usually the format or the confines of construction makes it. So for me, I was trying to fish for something, but I was confident that it would get it right because it was a space I don't think had been done well before. So I knew it'd be different. I didn't know if it'd be that successful. It wasn't in ratings terms.
And then you also ran a strand when you first joined Sheffield. I think Emma Cooper now does Cutting Edge, but you took over Cutting Edge, which you started back in the day. Yeah. And I remember you saying when you joined something about wanting to be the bloke in the loud shirt, or didn't mind being the bloke in the... What was that about?
I think that for Cutting Edge, it's a single documentary each week, different. And at the time, it was running as sort of strands of 6 or 8, and you're usually up against, I don't know, Spooks or something. It's a drama. You've got quite 2 dramas probably on the main 2 channels. And my analogy to you over a pint was, I need to be the guy in the yellow shirt at the party because I need to be seen. I need to be a bit of a dick, in that sense.
How's that going?
If I was urbane and cool, no one would see me. And I think there was an element of that into my thinking.
Did you find some of the old stuff, making this thing, did you look back at the previous eras thinking, Christ, I'd never have done that? It's a bit sort of,
I found what I found interesting, John's take on Peter's era was quite interesting in terms of, I think you felt that Peter's era was a bit more metropolitan, would you say? They had more money, and I was interested to see how the different worldviews turn. But in terms of the programming, I suppose it's such a different era, 1988 to now. You can't really compare.
This would have been a big audience for Channel 4 at the beginning. This would have been a massive audience. So
wasn't there a story that when Michael Gray pulled you in and said, wasn't there a documentary on the night before that was a moment where you knew you had to sort it out? I can't remember you telling me that story.
Well, I hope the filmmaker's not here. No, but the week before I joined, there was a documentary. It was called Water Tribunal, which played at 9 o'clock, which was about a Spanish water subtitle, made by an English filmmaker, about a Spanish water tribunal. And I don't know whether it was like watching. It was like watching water dry. It was, and probably half this audience was the total sum of the audience. And I thought we just need to move on a bit here. And everyone feels that in their different ways. Just the time I was there.
But it seems like you're all telling me that, your era was a golden era and you're not being too nasty about anyone else's era and it's all fine and it's all not... Commercialization is good news.
Era, are they?
What?
No one's used the word golden era.
I've used the word golden era, about John's era. But,
well, that was, of course, yeah. Thanks, Steve.
No. I mean, actually, I've got, because, you know, these are your public thoughts, but I kind of think that actually, maybe privately, it's a slightly different story. In fact, we've got some footage of Peter Dale, when he was head of Docs, talking about what he was really thinking.
Oh.
Do you want to see that?
No.
Why don't we roll the 5th clip?
He wasn't thinking much, clearly.
He will be. He'll be.
Jag, Antonius Block, spelar schack med död. Jag ser mig själv. Grips av vedervilja och skräck. Genom min likgiltighet för människorna. Numera lever jag i en spökvärld. Innesluten i mina drömmar och fantasier. Och trots det vill du inte dö? Jo, jag vill. Vad väntar du på? Jag vill ha vetskap. Du vill ha garanti. Kalla det vad du vill.
But you're really saying, I mean, everyone's sort of saying a happy story of Channel 4 is fantastic. It's a line I often use. It's fantastic because it's both public service and it's commercial. So you have to find that sweet spot of the two, and that's always good. But the truth is often there's a massive conflict there. There's a whole load of stuff that John could do in his era that has just been wiped away, hasn't it? You know what I mean? I mean, surely kind of there's something in all those shock documentaries you did, Simon, but in a way they're all pretty kind of like in your face, you know, sort of freak shows, aren't they? And do they really have the same soul that they did in the old days of documentary? You know, are you telling me that Wife Swap really is kind of as good as some of the classic things? No.
No, not at all. But I think what we're saying is, David, what we're trying to say, David, is that it goes in eras, it goes in waves and cycles, and each cycle is responding to a kind of what's coming through the door, what the audience is moving towards, gravitating towards, and what the kind of what the tastes of the people are who are selecting things, and even the bigger picture as well. But you know, no one has the monopoly on good here. I don't think it's just a kind of different era where the passion and the kind of curiosity and the real determination to make things that people want to make is channeled through a particular set of brains or a particular set of commercial needs. And that's the brilliant thing about it. You know, that's what seems to me is marvellous, is that it can channel these desires of everyone out there without and make it work for the audience at the time.
What if the next generation didn't really have anything you'd really recognise as a documentary? What if it became something? Does it matter that we have documentaries on Channel 4? I mean, what if we said, you know, the person sitting next to Mark Raphael there in the future...
Well, you've heard the news then.
And he's saying, well, my era is fantastic because it's much more kind of entertaining and it's more like kind of The Only Way is Essex or whatever it is. You know, does it matter if there's any documentaries or not? Do you just go whatever the public want?
We're getting quite close. This is where everyone in the room stands up and leaves at the same time, because this is where we're getting quite close to the old chestnut of a discussion. What is a documentary? You know, a sound of chairs flipping upwards as everyone makes for the door. I don't know what a documentary is anymore. There was a huge debate when Peter was doing the formats about whether or not they constituted documentary. There were panels here about whether or not these things were or weren't documentaries. And instead of trying to originate new ways of making television, some of our most august filmmakers would gather in this space to talk about whether what had already been out was a documentary or wasn't it. The Family, Series 1, I thought, we've got to keep it pure documentary. We're not going to have interviews. What a mistake that was. Series 2, we remedied that mistake. We added interviews, we added audience, and we rolled on. Oneborn just won a Best Reality Show trophy somewhere. You know, I mean, if you'd said to me when I joined Channel 4, you're going to be making reality shows, I would have said, no way. You know, that's not what I came to do. That's not what I'm doing. That's not what my programs are. But when you make a program or when you commission it and when you sign it off and when it gets broadcast, you have one view of it, but the audience has an entirely different view of what it is that you're offering them. They don't sit there trying to work out what type of show it is. They don't sit there trying to define a new kind of name for it. They just either like it or they don't. And if they like it, they really like it. And those are the shows that then morph into something else in their hearts and minds. And suddenly, those big discussions that are going on in people's living rooms about what shall we watch tonight, they're the ones that are interesting, not whether or not something's a doc or isn't.
John, do you think... Sorry.
I was just going to say, well, I think one of the great things about documentaries is that it's very adaptable and very promiscuous. So documentaries mate with, Feltham Sings, it's mating with music. It could mate with commercials. It could mate with animation, with drama, with outside broadcasts. A whole range of different technologies, and documentary more than almost any other form of television is capable of taking something from another part of the forest and mixing in and creating something different. That's one of the great reasons why I think documentaries will survive in different forms, because actually it just adapts, it mutates into something slightly different, but it's still got at its heart a documentary intention, which is to tell the audience what's happening around them.
Sounds right. Can we take questions, or does anyone want to ask questions? Or we could ask, Ralph's up there somewhere, we could ask him what the next white middle-aged male will do with the future of documentaries. Do we have any microphones? Yeah. Is Ralph around? There you are, Ralph. Do you want to tell us what you got planned? There we go, it's coming to you.
Well, I think Mark's already answered this partly. I think documentaries are in a really exciting place at the moment on 4, and the fact that we've got One Born Every Minute and 24 Hours on A&E and things like The Hotel doing so well, actually I think gives us, Mark and I and the rest of the team in Docs, a chance to open up the doors to new and radical and unthought of approaches and subjects. If we don't use this time to innovate and to speculate and to take risk, we've got the opportunity to take risk given to us by the success of these big returning brands, then we've really missed that opportunity. So I'd say I can't gaze into my crystal ball and say, well, this is going to be the future of documentary. I hope that in the next couple of years we'll try lots of things, and some of them will work and some of them will be interesting. I think, though, just to come back to the panel discussion, which has been really interesting, there's a layer of context which is slightly missing. We've used the word commercialization as if that's just Channel 4, but actually you've got to look at the wider environment in which docs have been commissioned. And in 1988, for instance, Channel 4 was the 4th channel and the audience had no other choice. You could put a subtitled Italian documentary about Pasolini on at 9 o'clock and it would get over 1 million viewers. So the audience's choice is incredibly restricted. And also, on the other hand, Channel 4's opportunity to purchase stuff from the rest of the world was huge because there was no other outlets for it in the UK. So titles like Friends, which for years, almost decades, paid Channel 4's wage bill, were bought for buttons because there was no competition. Now, all that material that's made internationally, all the big dramas, all the big comedies, etc., we have to fight incredibly hard commercially to win any of it. So getting a title like Homeland on Channel 4 is really significant, and it's the exception rather than the rule. Most of it goes straight to Sky Atlantic. So we're in an enormously changed environment. So I think the fact that Channel 4 has commissioned documentaries and factual programs to fill some of that commercial space, to compete hard in the schedule where comedy, drama, imports used to sit, is actually to its credit. And the fact that some of that investment that could have gone into entertainment or could have gone into more feature shows actually backed Peter to do formatted documentaries in a really big way, and has backed Simon and Mark into the rig shows are a huge investment. They are very big risky rolls of the dice. The fact that Channel 4's been able to do that and that's been putting money into that space, partly as a result of closing down Big Brother, hopefully gives us, a picture that factual and documentaries has a strong future on Channel 4.
Cool. Anyone got any questions? Anyone got a question? Yeah, there's a question right up to the back there.
Yeah, I'm just curious about where the panel see a show like Made in Chelsea fitting into the landscape, and whether you would consider that to be the sort of logical conclusion of Wife Swap and so forth, the sort of mediated, is it reality, is it fake?
I suppose Made in Chelsea, where do I see it? I see it on E4 at 10 o'clock on a Monday, which is sort of where it is, and I think it works incredibly well in that slot. I suppose I don't see the same connection. There was a BAFTA panel, wasn't there, about constructed reality and documentary. I suppose, going back to what I was saying earlier, that authenticity that our documentaries have, it seems to be what the audience wants from the documentaries on Channel 4. And I think that sort of constructed element services another audience or another appetite. I don't see it being an either or a natural progression.
The key thing is not authentic.
Yeah. Any more? One last question, maybe? Anyone? No. Enough navel-gazing, self-congratulatory Channel 4 people telling you how good their documentary output was. Yeah, got a question there. Go on. One last question, then we'll wrap it up. But thank you very much.
It just strikes me that moving from...
Do you want a microphone? You don't really need a microphone, but you can have one anyway.
Sorry. It seems to me that moving from right to left, or left to right, that it's about the story of actually minimising risk to me. Because I watched that early clip, and it's like you're filming something and you don't know what's going to happen. You're just going in there blind. Then you go to formats, which is, right, we're going to have to format something to make sure something happens. And then you get to the last one, which is, we're going to have to spread it with so many cameras that something's got to come out here. And I'm just interested in maybe Mark and ask him, do you feel comfortable with risk? Or, is...
Yeah, I mean, I would... do you mind?
Go for it.
We both have a pop. Good question. I understand where you're coming from. Fundamentally, wholeheartedly disagree with it, however. Because I think what we need to analyse is what we mean by risk. I've always thought that what is risk is a more interesting conversation than what is a documentary, and therefore you're asking a question that's in a really interesting and a good space.
Congratulations. Now you're answering.
The risk to Channel 4 when you're doing 8 hours is 8 times greater than when you're doing 1. And therefore, I always perceived risk, or at least as the longer I was at Channel 4, the more sort of capable I became in a kind of broadcast environment, the more I perceived risk as being something that affects the channel as a whole. In other words, its ability to earn money to do interesting stuff, its ability to rate well over a period of 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 weeks. So I always felt, and Ralph talks about rolls of the dice, I always felt that I was taking risks when I was commissioning programs that were going to gobble up huge chunks of the schedule. I don't think that I can say at the same time that some single films are not risky, because they are, and certainly John's example was a hugely risky film to make in personal terms and professional terms for everyone involved. However, had it not worked, had it been untransmittable, had it never made it to air, the risk to Channel 4 would not have been significant. The risk, of course, is a wider cultural one, in as much as what that film was saying would not have been publicised, and therefore Britain as a whole would be a less rich place through that film not being broadcast. But if you see risk from a broadcaster's perspective, I think I would say that the risk is increasing as you go along the line here. And I think Mark and Ralph and Nick and the Docs team going forward, they're going to be experiencing a really acute type of risk going forward, which is playing for keeps with large numbers of hours and trying to originate in form and content. Very risky.
I think that's run out of time, so all it leaves me to say is thank you very much to our fantastic panel. I've been David Glover, and nice to see you all.
Is that right? Yeah, good.